Imagine the stifling, acrid scent of charred timber and melted plastic lingering heavily in the cold morning air. A family home has been reduced to a blackened, hollow shell, its cherished memories turned instantly to gray soot. Amidst the total devastation, emergency responders step carefully through the still smoldering debris, their heavy boots crunching on ruined possessions as their flashlights cut through the thick haze. Then the sweeping beam catches something utterly impossible, hanging on a blistered, ruined wall, or lying face up in a pile of wet, dark ash, is a framed portrait. It is completely untouched by the ravenous inferno. The canvas depicts a young, tearful child staring out with wide, profoundly sorrowful eyes. The delicate edges of the frame are not even singed, and the fragile glass remains perfectly intact despite the catastrophic heat that melted a heavy television set just feet away. This was not an isolated miracle or a bizarre trick of thermodynamics. It was the terrifying, undeniable signature of a phenomenon that would soon grip an entire nation in a relentless stranglehold of fear. To truly understand the creeping dread that permeated the UK throughout the 1980s, one must look at the ubiquitous, almost invisible nature of this specific artwork. Mass-produced prints of the crying boy painting were entirely commonplace, adorning the wallpapered living rooms of countless working-class families. They were cheap, sentimental decor, bought casually in local department stores and bustling weekend markets. No one could have possibly anticipated that these mass-produced objects would suddenly become the focal point for a terrifying wave of unexplained destruction. The initial alarm was not raised by superstitious homeowners prone to flights of fancy, but by seasoned, highly pragmatic firefighters. Accounts suggest that fire brigades across northern England began to notice a deeply unsettling, recurring pattern in the ashes. Station officers reported attending devastating house fires where the structural damage was absolute, yet the tearful visage of the boy always inexplicably survived the blaze. As one veteran firefighter recounted, the survival of the fragile paper defied all known logic of thermodynamics and fire behavior. A profound, unspoken unease began to spread through the tight-knit ranks of these emergency responders. Men who routinely faced down roaring, lethal infernos without hesitation found themselves deeply unsettled by the pristine condition of the artwork. The immaculate survivor sitting in the wet ashes felt less like a random coincidence and more like a deliberate, mocking taunt from something unseen. The psychological toll of finding the exact same weeping child in house after ruined house began to slowly fracture their pragmatic, grounded worldview. It was precisely from this fertile ground of professional dread that the modern legend took its deepest root. Local folklore claims that the artwork itself was a dark harbinger of tragedy, drawing catastrophic misfortune to anyone foolish enough to hang it within their home. The chilling concept of cursed objects is ancient, echoing through centuries of human history, but rarely does mass superstition attach itself so aggressively and so rapidly to something so mundane, sentimental, and widely distributed. Consider the raw, intimate terror of the families who unknowingly invited this unseen presence, forever changing the atmosphere the moment the artwork enters the home. Witnesses reported that long before the unexplained fires ever sparked, a heavy, oppressive atmosphere would subtly settle over the specific room where the portrait hung. The air would grow unnaturally cold regardless of the heating, and the comforting silence of the house would be punctuated by faint, inexplicable sounds like the soft, rhythmic shuffling of small feet on the wooden floorboards above. Some terrified owners claimed the boy's painted expression seemed to subtly shift in the dim evening light, the rendered tears appearing to glisten with fresh, impossible moisture. The fixed gaze of the child, initially perceived as merely sorrowful and pathetic, began to feel deeply accusatory and quietly malevolent. It was as if the invisible entity trapped within the ink and paper was actively feeding on the ambient anxiety of the household, patiently waiting for the perfect, most devastating moment to strike. When the violent ignition finally occurred, it was almost always sudden and devastatingly swift. Families would wake in the dead of night to the choking smell of thick smoke, finding their living rooms entirely consumed by flames that seemed to burn with an unnatural, ferocious intensity. The blazes frequently started without any discernible source, entirely bypassing faulty wiring or unattended kitchen stoves, erupting directly and violently in the immediate vicinity of the weeping child on the wall. The simmering, localized panic finally reached a terrifying boiling point in the autumn of 1985 when a prominent British tabloid published an explosive, sensational front-page story. The article graphically detailed the horrific experience of a family whose home in South Yorkshire was completely gutted by a mysterious blaze, leaving only the framed print completely unscathed in the black ruins. This massive public exposure acted as a powerful catalyst, opening the floodgates for hundreds of similar, terrifying testimonies from across the entire country. The nation was rapidly consumed by an unprecedented, sweeping wave of mass hysteria. Telephone lines at the newspaper's London headquarters were constantly jammed with frantic calls from terrified readers, all reporting their own narrow escapes, unexplained domestic phenomena, and the chilling, impossible survival of the artwork. People began to look at their own walls with deep, creeping suspicion, realizing that the cheap, sentimental decoration they had purchased years ago might actually be a dormant, lethal threat waiting to ignite. The domestic sphere, usually revered as a place of absolute safety and refuge, was suddenly transformed into a tense landscape of constant, gnawing paranoia. The pervasive fear was not just of the fire itself, but of the deeply unsettling, fundamental idea that an inanimate object could harbor a conscious, destructive will. The cursed crying boy painting had successfully infiltrated the collective psyche of the nation, proving that true horror often resides in the most familiar, everyday places. To unravel the obscure origins of this dark attachment, paranormal investigators looked back to the creator of the original works, an enigmatic Italian artist known by the pseudonym Giovanni Bragolin. Following the devastation of the Second World War, he painted dozens of portraits featuring impoverished, tearful children, capitalizing on the melancholic, tragic sentimentality of the post-war era. The mass-produced copies that eventually flooded the British market decades later were all derived from these original, sorrowful canvases. Darker, far more sinister rumors soon began to circulate regarding the specific child depicted in the most infamous version of the widely sold print. Chilling urban legends suggested the boy was a mute street orphan whose very physical presence was constantly associated with spontaneous, localized combustion. According to the deeply unsettling lore, the child's own tragic, fiery death in a subsequent blaze permanently tethered a vengeful, chaotic poltergeist to his painted likeness, ensuring his profound sorrow would be endlessly replicated. This esoteric concept of spiritual tethering offers a terrifying framework for the entire phenomenon. If intense, sudden emotional trauma can permanently imprint itself onto a physical location, perhaps it can also bind an ectoplasmic manifestation to a widely duplicated, mass-produced image. The staggering mass production of the artwork might not have diluted the entity's dark power, but rather provided it with thousands of distinct physical anchors, allowing the destructive force to manifest simultaneously in countless homes across the country. Driven by the escalating, unmanageable terror of its vast readership, the tabloid newspaper organized a massive, highly publicized purge of the cursed objects. Readers were explicitly instructed to send their copies of the artwork directly to the publication's regional headquarters for a coordinated mass destruction event. The desperate intent was to finally break the psychological cycle of fear, to physically eradicate the perceived supernatural threat through a grand, theatrical bonfire that would cleanse the nation's palate. Yet even in the midst of this organized, highly supervised destruction, the phenomenon displayed a chilling, stubborn resilience. Witnesses reported with immense unease that the prints were unnervingly difficult to ignite in the massive pyres. The roaring flames seemed to lick harmlessly at the edges of the canvas, requiring heavy chemical accelerants to finally consume the weeping faces. The sheer, unnatural reluctance of the material to burn only deepened the widespread conviction that something fundamentally demonic was at play. Those present at the roaring bonfires described a heavy, suffocating, almost toxic atmosphere surrounding the blazing pyres. As the thick, unnaturally black smoke plumed high into the overcast sky, observers noted an eerie, oppressive silence falling over the usually rowdy crowd. One shaken witness recounted feeling a profound, sudden sense of sorrow mixed with an icy dread, as if the collective, violent destruction of the images was releasing a concentrated wave of negative, unseen energy directly into the atmosphere. In the immediate aftermath of the widespread panic, dedicated fire investigators attempted to impose a rational, comforting order on the terrifying chaos. They officially concluded that the prints were heavily treated with a fire-retardant varnish at the factory, and that the flimsy string holding the frames would quickly burn first, causing the picture to fall face down and escape the worst of the rising heat. It was a neat, purely scientific explanation specifically designed to extinguish the rampant, unchecked paranoia. But cold logic rarely provides any real comfort when confronted with the terrifying abyss of the unknown. For the devastated families who had helplessly watched their entire lives turn to ash while the boys stared back untouched, the chemical composition of the factory varnish meant absolutely nothing. The dry scientific explanation could not possibly account for the oppressive cold spots, the subtly shifting painted expressions, or the sheer, staggering statistical impossibility of so many spontaneous ignitions occurring precisely where the prints hung. The phenomenon ultimately focuses less on the precise physical mechanics of the fires and far more on the terrifying, enduring vulnerability of the human mind. The true, lasting horror lies in the lingering doubt, the creeping, inescapable suspicion that the logical explanations are merely a fragile, paper-thin shield we hold up against the vast dark. The pristine survivor sitting in the ashes remains a potent, terrifying symbol of forces we can neither fully control nor ever truly comprehend. Though the intense mass hysteria of the 1980s eventually subsided into quiet whispers, the legend itself never truly died. It mutated, spreading like a virus across modern digital landscapes and finding entirely new, younger audiences eager to test the dangerous boundaries of the curse. Reports still surface sporadically of sudden, unexplained fires in modern homes where vintage copies of the print have been recently acquired, suggesting the dark attachment has simply gone dormant, patiently waiting for a new generation. There are always those who still actively seek out the original, surviving prints, drawn by a morbid, dangerous fascination with the macabre. They boldly hang the weeping child in their quiet hallways and darkened bedrooms, silently daring the unseen entity to manifest once again. But as the long shadows stretch in their homes and the floorboards creak inexplicably in the dead of night, the initial thrill of the taboo often gives way to a suffocating, inescapable, and profound dread. The painted, sorrowful eyes continue to watch from the flat surface of the canvas. The rendered tears continue to fall in silent, eternal, and unbroken sorrow. The entity, whatever it may truly be, remains trapped within the static, unchanging confines of the artwork, a silent witness to the immense destruction it allegedly commands. The dark energy, bound tightly to the image, does not simply dissipate over time. It merely waits for the right atmospheric conditions to violently spark once more. The enduring mystery of the weeping child remains an open, weeping wound in the annals of the unexplained. It fundamentally challenges our basic understanding of the material world, asking whether a simple, mass-produced piece of art can truly serve as a permanent conduit for pure, unadulterated ruin. As you look at the empty, quiet spaces on your own walls tonight, you must ask yourself what unseen, patient forces might already be gathering in the dark corners of your home, waiting for the smoke to rise.